I'm Catherine Goldman Schuyler, and this is Exploring Leadership. In this series of conversations, I'll introduce you to leaders who dance with possibility, whose creativity, depth, and vision bring leadership to life. People from many arenas, business, the arts, government, whose lives add vitality and meaning to our planet. I'm delighted to be here today with Ann Stevens, who has been a top executive at many global firms, including Ford Motor Company and GKN, which is a $15 billion global engineering business. Ann, you and I met in the late 1980s at Exxon, where you were an engineer and I was in the organization development group. Looking back from the time we met, to let people know who don't know you, before that, you had initially worked for your local phone company, met and married your husband, went to college in engineering, and then joined Exxon Chemicals. Since then, you moved on to the Ford Motor Company, where you went from being a marketing specialist to becoming VP for North American Manufacturing, to Group VP for Canada, Mexico, and South America, to Chief Operating Officer for the Americas. You were the first woman ever to manage a Ford factory in Europe, and also the first woman to be an EVP at Ford. At the same time, you were one of only 2 women on a list of the most influential people in the auto industry, and also appeared 4 times on Fortune magazine's list of the 50 most influential women in business. Since then, you moved on to serving as chairman, CEO, and president of Carpenter Technology Company and chief executive of GKN, the global engineering firm. In addition, you and your husband, I know, have a daughter and raise dogs, so I know you haven't only focused on business. Today, I'd like to explore how you reached this level of corporate power and influence, what it's meant to you, and what you'd still like to help happen in the world. So, what did it take to arrive at a position to lead the major change that you did at Ford?
It's not just one thing. It, of course, is having the experience and the strategy and the skills to get it done. So let's just say you have to have a vision, you have to have a strategy, you have to have a plan. You can have the best strategy and the best plan in the world, but if you don't have a team of people that are aligned together to deliver it, it's not going to happen. And anytime you're going to do something like this, culture is important. Does this team have the existing culture in order to implement the changes that the strategy is going to deliver? If not, then you either change the team so that you can move on. The other element that I think is really important is performance, and having a culture of a high performing team, but a team that is willing to take risk. And if someone in the team fails, you fail fast and you move on. So it's performance, it's the vision, the strategy, the objectives, but it's the team, it's the culture, and it's this mutual support that together you can achieve objectives higher than you ever thought.
So when you joined Ford, I think you were a marketing specialist and you moved from there to becoming EVP and head of operations for the Americas. How did you move into that level of responsibility and influence at Ford?
People talk a lot about the importance of mentorship and advocacy. And at Ford at the beginning, I was really fortunate to have a manager that sat me down and said, Ann, you're an engineer. You're either going to move into manufacturing or product development. You need to understand how things work here. This company works in fraternities, either manufacturing, product development, finance, IT, HR, whatever. As an engineer, you should pick manufacturing or product development. So I picked manufacturing. I got a position as quality manager of one of the major plants. Took the role as a quality manager, moved to positions of area manager, assistant plant manager, and then ultimately plant manager. So I joined the manufacturing fraternity. From there, did move to product development, interviewed back for an executive position in manufacturing, got the position, and the group vice president of manufacturing said to me, "Welcome home." So it's, I think the thing is really key. All organizations work differently. It's very important to understand how the organization works and what's the protocol within the organization. What's the written rules? What are the unwritten rules?
How do you learn the unwritten rules?
Sometimes scars. Sometimes you make mistakes and you have a mentor that cares enough to tell you, and you go back and repair the damage and move on. And sometimes that's the importance of mentors and advocates, that they can teach you before you make mistakes. So I would say, some the easy way people teach you, and some the hard way you develop scars.
So did it happen easily to find mentors and supporters at Ford? Or what made that possible?
For me at Ford, and I think, Catherine, I think what is important is that you work in an organization that you have a cultural and a value system fit. And for me, the values within Ford and the culture within Ford were consistent with my own. For me, I struggled at Exxon. My value system and how I worked wasn't exactly the way that company worked. So for me, Ford was a much better fit. And when it's a better fit, then people see that you're like them and that you work well together, and people help. I've advocated many people along the way and mentored many people along the way, but you tend to advocate for and mentor people that you see fit within the organization, and it's going to help move the organization forward.
What made for that fit at Ford? Was it your connection with Deming and quality, or what do you think made that such a good fit?
I think it didn't hurt that I love vehicles. From a little child, I've always liked vehicles. I liked automotives. I liked racing. So, I think having love for the product didn't hurt. But Ford was very much, and it's been quite a few years, so I can't talk about what Ford is like today. But back then, Ford was very much had an essence of a family company. Even though it was a large public company, there was some family spirit. At that time, if you lived in Detroit and you'd ask people where you work, they'd say they worked at Ford's, meaning they worked at Ford's company. So for me, it was a fit.
So that family feeling and the vehicles just from the get-go made a difference.
Yes, I felt right at home.
Yeah, that feeling of right at home must be really important. Now, did it matter being a woman in that company? Was that any easier than being a woman at Exxon?
It was a lot easier at Ford being a woman than being a woman at Exxon. There were a lot of the factory workers are women, so there were more women there. At Exxon, you can remember if you went into refineries at that time, there were very few women, let alone engineers or managers or vice presidents. So there were more women within the company at Ford than within Exxon. At the higher levels, no. I really pushed the barrier, as you said in the introduction, and quite a few of the positions that I took. But there it was a different culture. I remember one time being out on the factory floor of the very first plant that I worked in, and I was working on a maintenance project at night with some of the skilled trades. And I was only at the plant at that time several weeks and walking the floor with one of the electricians. And he looked at me and he said, you're on the operating committee. And I said, yes. And he said, good. And I looked at him and smiled. And he says, I have a daughter, and if you can do it, so can she. So it was a very different culture. And for me, it fit. I think that's really important to everybody, is if you find yourself in a company that you don't have the same value system or you don't have the ethics system, leave. It's not a fit. And you're never going to be happy there. For me, I was extremely happy before.
I think what you said there is really important for everyone to think about. I'm sure that's still true today. What do you think has changed for women today? Does it seem like it's changed for women who want to get to top leadership roles, or not?
I would say, it depends. I mean, obviously, I served on the board of Lockheed Martin from 2002 through 2017. And today, the CEO of Lockheed Martin is a woman. Now, when I joined that board in 2002, that probably we would not have thought would have happened. But the company changed, diversity programs came in just like we put them in Ford. Inclusion, it became a more inclusive culture. So by the time we were looking for a CEO, the most qualified person for the job was Marilyn Houston, who is a woman. So I think it's different. I think cultures in most of the companies today are more inclusive than they were back when you and I were within Exxon Chemical. But I still think that there is challenge, and I don't think that I can say that it exists like that for every company. But certainly, it's better than it was back years ago.
Now, you've worked in Latin America, in the US, in the UK at least. Does it has has it been different being a woman leader in those different cultures? Is it more the company, the national culture, a combination of both?
I think it's a combination of both, because right now in Britain, the Prime Minister Theresa May is a woman, and there are several CEOs that are women in the UK. But I can tell you, in my position as CEO of GKN, I interfaced with several hundred of the major banking and investment firms, quite a few of the shareholders, and I can count on one hand the number of leads in major investment companies that are women. So I think that there are still many areas that there's a long way to go. But even on Wall Street, there are more women, but still not as many as men. So it depends on the function, the culture of the function. Some are more inclusive, and I think the key, Catherine, for me, it's this culture of inclusivity. And when you talk about diversity, for me, it's not basically saying have more women and or more people of color in. It's basically talking about, years ago you had this very small white male all boys club. And it's not a matter of letting a few women and people of color in. It's basically expanding this circle of inclusivity so that the culture and the company and the function is more inclusive.
That's great. Are there challenges that you still want to take on today? What remains of interest and challenge for you now?
Well, I never expected at age 69, Catherine, to be a CEO of a major public company in the UK. So I would say I'm always open to more challenges and opportunities. The one thing that I'm doing now is assuming the role of Remuneration Committee Chair in Anglo American. And the issue that is there in that company as well as other companies is compensation. The compensation, if you look at the highest levels of a company versus people at lower levels, there's a big gap in compensation and what's equitable and what is right. And I think when you're talking about what is equitable and what is right, it's got political as well as corporate implications. And it's finding what's the right balance. Because if you look at some compensation, it's excessive, and so as chairing Remco, it's basically rewarding for performance. When the shareholder wins, then the CEO and the top team should be rewarded, but people working for the company should earn a fair wage as well. When you ask me the question about some of the work of being in a high performing team, one of the positions that I took within Ford, I was executive director of vehicle assembly. And the challenge for me at that time, you change CEOs, you have a different focus. Peterson directly studied with Deming and brought a lot of quality principles into Ford Motor Company. With changes of CEO, the company lost the focus on quality. And when I took the position, the focus had 17 recalls within the first couple months of introduction. So I had a major quality issue. Having studied with Deming, I understood quality, went into the plants, and you know what I found out? The people on the factory floor really understood quality. And if you reflect back to Japan and Deming was sent into Japan by the US government. And the Japanese didn't know how to compete. So Deming said, well, you can't compete mass production like the facilities in the US of Ford, Chrysler, and General Motors, but you can compete on quality. And that's what they did. They competed on quality. He said, you may not have the quiet generation and the baby boomers buy your vehicles, but you'll have the next generation that'll buy the used vehicles. You'll get the reputation of having the higher quality product. And if you basically look, Toyota came in, they sold the vehicles, built the quality reputation, and really forced the American companies to change. And so, when Deming subsequently came in and coached Peterson, the people in the plant remembered. I came back in after the company lost their way through a couple CEOs on quality, and the people remembered.
By the way, I was at Exxon, I was on a global safety group, and I still think about safety. And what I really noticed recently about Toyota includes the safety features in all their cars, whether they're the more expensive levels or not. And other manufacturers are only putting the higher level safety features if you pay for them. And I think that's a very different level of commitment to both quality and safety.
No, I do too. The one thing, and this is aside from the interview, when you say things that I'm passionate about, being on the board of Anglo, I had the opportunity to join the Global Hydrogen Council, which is vehicles electrify. You can run the vehicle either by battery or by hydrogen. And, that's looking at what we're doing for the environment as vehicles electrify. So, I've gotten to sit with the chairman of Toyota and Kawasaki and, some of the Japanese and actually the Chinese, and really pushing green and helping the environment. So when you say some of the things that I'm passionate about, it's these higher level things that really can help change the planet, not only for us, but for the next generation.
What do you see, Anne, right now as important in terms of how industry is contributing to the greenness of the planet or to having the planet really be sustainable or even regenerative?
Is I think we do have climate change. Something clearly is going on that I do think we're contributing to. So I think all of us have the responsibility to attack the cleanliness of the air. For me, being involved in mining and automotive and having been involved in aerospace, it's looking at not only emissions, but it's how you achieve green, because you can achieve green with more energy than actually you're saving in the long run. So, for me, I think hydrogen is really a good source of energy. If you look at countries like China or Japan, you can actually manufacture hydrogen from water. And so when you talk about clean fuel, hydrogen's a clean fuel. There are other solutions, but I think all of us within our own expertise can contribute in that manner. So I do think it's an issue, but it's not only the big scale. I live on a beachfront, and I think all of us that go to a beach, take a brown bag along, and as you're walking the beach, pick up plastic or pick up things that don't belong on the beach, and help the environment be clean. I'll never forget the story of the little boy, and he's walking the beach, and there were thousands and thousands of starfish that washed up on the beach. And he's picking up the starfish and throwing them back in. And an old man walks by and he says, "Well, what are you doing?" He says, "Well, I'm trying to save the starfish." He said, "Son," he said, "look at how many starfish." He says, "Do you really think you could make a difference?" He says, "I'm making a difference for the one that I'm throwing back in and are living to survive another day." So regardless of what you do, picking up plastic on the beach, saving turtles, whatever, all of us can do something.
Thanks. I'm glad that we got to talk about that too. What haven't I asked you that you think is important for people who are interested in understanding leadership at the top?
I think what is important, and we talked about it a bit, and I know it's things that we talked about when we were at Exxon, it's finding the right balance of happiness in life. And for me, for all of us, career is so important. And it's being happy and giving happiness. And the one thing that Deming really taught me, and he he had his principles, his 14 points, and the one that's in there is pride of workmanship. Pride of workmanship. It's being proud of what you do. I mean, we all have good days and we all have bad days, but at the end of the day, are you proud of what you're doing? And are you giving the people that work with you and around you and for you pride in doing the work? Because at the end of the day, I think that's what's really important. And that's what we should all get from our careers.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much for joining me today, Anne Stevens. I really appreciate the time.
It's been a pleasure. It's been great seeing you again.